Phill, thank you for taking the time to chat to me today. People will know from the title of this episode that we're talking about enabling managers to drive employee development. Now, when we did the trends report last year, we looked at a load of data. It was there that managers are the person or the single person with the most influence on an employee and their development and performance. So how do we get them managers to buy in to development?
I think it depends what type of manager they are. So some managers won't need any persuasion to buy in. They're the managers you see, everything's about people development. If they go, they go, it's all about them. And they're the leaders that we want. You've then got the managers who say, well, I'll develop them, but I don't want them to leave, so I'm not really sure about it. Let's have an argument. Might it work, might it not work? And then you've got the managers who put profit over people. So they're the ones that say, yeah, it's not going to work because it's going to cost me 150 grand this year to do, and I won't get that back. And that their P&L is the most important thing to them this week and this month. So for me, it's about understanding their agenda and tailoring to that. So that last category of manager who put profit first is about saying, you're right. And I'm not apologising for that. It will cost you this much money, but in 3 years' time, you'll see that back tenfold in terms of increased performance and increased productivity and reduced recruitment costs and that sort of thing. But for me, it's about tailoring that agenda to meet their agenda.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation recently and someone was talking about mapping out your stakeholders for projects. And it sounds like a similar exercise here, you know, why would they have reservations or how bought in are they? And then once we know that, how do we tailor how we speak to those people to either drive up that buy-in they already have or try and get over the hesitations and hurdles they have?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Everything in L&D is about individuality. People's development is individual. It's not a group activity. So, you need to get managers to buy into it. And it also, the development of their team will support their own development.
And once they are bought in, what do we do to enable them to develop? Because this was another finding from the same research that actually there are a bunch of areas managers did want more enablement in, like career conversations, like building out the sort of pathway for people to grow. But, once they are bought in, how do we enable them to approach development in the right way?
I think it's about facilitation and empowerment. So managers should be able to facilitate development, but employees should own it. So this is about teaching them, how do you have this conversation? How do you manage somebody's expectations? What opportunities are available? Is there an apprenticeship? Is it about shadowing? Is it about coaching? So our role in L&D is about saying, here's what you can do, here's how you can do it. But it's your job to do that with the individual. And remembering that each individual wants something slightly different. So actually, the managers get development in developing their own teams.
Yeah, that's why the enablement of things like having the conversations is important, and how you map someone's proficiency or skill is important, because then you can target it to the individual because you really understand them.
Yeah, you can. And I think the issue is we historically promote the people who are best at a job, make them managers, and then don't teach them how to be managers. So we say, you're the best engineer I've got, therefore you'll make the best manager. And potentially they're the worst manager, because when they stop being an engineer, they start being a people manager, and they're not an engineer anymore. So we need to support them in that journey. If we want to make them a manager, we've got to invest in them so that they can invest in their teams.
Funny enough, that's exactly what happened to me in my first role. I was only there about a year, loads of people above me left. By default, ended up getting offered that position to be higher up in the team, but I didn't have the skill set really, the experience, the people management skills. So I definitely think it is a case of enabling a person, and that's...
Yeah, it's very much that. And actually, to be a manager of a team, you don't have to be able to do what everyone in your team can do. It's about managing people, time, processes, relationships, that sort of thing. It's not about doing the actual day-to-day job that they do, and people don't realise that.
And when you've seen those managers who do have a good understanding of what's important to their employee and their growth, what they need to perform, is there any common things they do well when it comes to giving the people the tools to own that development and go and do it properly?
Yeah, they build relationships. They're just people. I know that's a really cliche term that we use in learning, but it's all about building relationships and understanding. I think for an L&D professional, one of the key skills we need is about listening, and listening to understand, not listening to respond. And once we listen, we can then advise. Too often, a business or an organisation will say, we're going to do this, we're going to do it in this way, you need to fall in line. Very, very rarely is that ever the right way to do things. It's about saying, here's the end goal we want to get to, and it might be We want people to have better conversations. But instead of saying, here's how the appraisal will work, it's how do we get to this point? Do you want it different to you? Do you want it different to you? So, yeah, for me, it's about building relationships and stakeholder management.
And once we do get people brought in, the managers get it, the learners are empowered to own their development. We don't want them to then deal with these clunky processes that kill all of that buy-in that we've just fostered. So how do we make sure the process has kind of less friction and actually works for everyone?
There's no need ever for 5 levels of authorization to get training, approved. It happens because maybe there was one level, and then you put another level of management in the business and you thought you should probably let them have a say as well. Then another one, and then an outside company wants, because they're funding it, they want it. For me, it's about what's the end result you want to get to, and then empowering managers to get there. So if you're having the right conversations with your managers around, here's your budget, here's a framework you can work within, then why do you need to approve that? What it says is you don't trust your managers. So for me, it's about the organisation empowering and investing in the trust of their managers so they can facilitate that, not without any sort of limitations, but as long as it aligns with business objectives, operational strategy, and the manager says, yeah, look, I've got budget for it, I've planned it, it supports the development of my team, then I don't know why we need these levels of authority at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the foundation is there and we're clear on what role growth plays in someone's performance and the overall company objective, then there is no need, really. People should be able to make decisions pretty quickly.
I think so. Otherwise, why are they managers? If it has to go to the MD or the CEO every time, what's the point in having that manager there? Because does the absence request or the annual leave request have to go there as well? Does everything have to go there? So what's that manager doing? If they're just another layer for the sake of it, it doesn't make any sense. But the key thing is to empower those managers to say, right, here's our operational strategy as an organisation. Here's how your team contributes to that. So here you work out how your individuals contribute to that. And as long as their development aligns with that, do what you like.
When we spoke last time, we kind of discussed the idea that whether it's the managers, the learners themselves, the stakeholders, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. And we actually need to enable managers to kind of work out where they tailor this to people, I think you mentioned the example of like high performance before, or like higher engaged people. It's like, how do we then approach that mix of different levels of engagement, different levels of performance across the team?
For me, it's all about personal development plans. So they should be led by the employee. So if you should have a plan, you should want a plan, and you should bring it to a manager and say, here's how I want to develop. Now they have the right to go, love that, but actually it doesn't quite align with us, so can we discuss it, can we talk about it? But there is no one size fits all, you're quite right. So if you say, here's how we're going to do a big apprenticeship and everyone jumps on it and it'll be fine, it's not right for everybody. So what you're going to see is you're going to lose interest and you're going to have people drop out and people are less engaged and they're going to leave. So it's about building that plan and empowering the employee to say, here's what I want, here's where I want to get to, can you support me in how I get there? Give me the resources, give me the funding, give me the time off, whatever it might be, give me the support, the shadowing, the coaching to get there. So everything has to be individual. There'll be themes, particularly within teams of people that do certain things, similar things, but everything has to be individualized at every level, top talent and struggling employees and everywhere in between.
I know as well from our last conversation, something you did to ensure you're doing that well is that talent mapping process. So, really getting an understanding of who your talent are. Tell me a bit more about how you did that and maybe some lessons other people can learn.
Yeah, so talent mapping, there's no wrong way to do it, depending on what you want as an organisation. So what we did is we relied on that experience and that subjectivity as a first point. So I think people worry too much about framework and saying, well, let's see where they sit on a 9-box grid and how does this work against this leadership framework. Actually, the first point of call is to say to your manager, right, here's a grid, and we've used a 20-box grid, for example, a bit more detail than a 9-box. This is right, you plot them based on these criteria. Then here's 4 or 5 tools for you to ratify that decision and make sure they all match. If they don't, move them around a bit. Once that's done, we'll compile all the team's talent maps and we'll calibrate that as a business to see that on average, how much have we got in the top corner? Have we got 5, 6, 7% in the top corner? And where do people sit and what movements can we support them with? But I think too often we say there's this framework, we must fit into it. If we don't, there's something wrong. That isn't the case. Talent is dependent on your organisational strategy. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What's the purpose of mapping your talent? And until you know that, you don't know how to do it. But for me, it's all about saying, you're the manager, you know your teams. So tell me where you think they are. You can never remove subjectivity from any sort of talent ID process.
Yeah, I mean, that is maybe part of the problem is to trying to codify everything. But like you say, the human element is there. Managers know their people well. How do we then just give them the tool to map that out of their brain and like see it, visualize it?
Yeah, and everything these days is about scores, right? It's about metrics and data. And data is really important, don't get me wrong. But, if I said to you, Gary, listen, I've done your talent mapping, you're a 5. What even is that? What does it mean? So what? And is 5 in the middle? Am I just saying you're okay, you're all right? Actually, what I need for you to understand is, here's how you're performing against what your expectations are, and here's how we're going to improve. So, yeah, but I know you best as your manager. So I would expect that managers can contribute to that from an experiential perspective, and then to get some consistency across the business, you'd want those tools to say, okay, well, here's our leadership framework, here's our values, here's our behaviours, here's our measures of agility and change and results and people and so on. So let's make sure we reference those when agreeing on maps.
A theme that's been coming up in a lot of conversations I have recently is around clarity, especially with things like definition. So I think this actually is part of the manager enablement conversation as well. Do we have a clear definition of what high performance looks like in this company? Do we have a clear definition of what X, Y, Z skill we're telling people we need to build is? Because if we don't have shared definitions we're all on board with, then we end up back into the worst kind of subjectivity. Is like, well, actually, in my opinion, I have built this skill, but in your opinion, I haven't. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. And I think whenever we set targets for our teams or KPIs or whatever, we have to be really clear. There's always been talk about SMART goals, things like that. But they're absolutely right. If you say, look, I need you to increase your revenue next month, if I increase it by 50p, is that enough? Or do I say, I need you to bring in £1,500 a month every month until December? That's really, really clear. And it's easy to measure that. So the outcomes, whether they're revenue orientated or sales or conversion of leads or whatever it is, and it might be not linked to performance, it might be linked to development, something like that. It just has to be clear about how we're measuring it. And again, back to our earlier discussions, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So the expectations on you might be different to the expectations on me.
And a byproduct of being clear about something is you can tailor it more. So like you said, your example of your goal is to increase revenue, like you say, I could just go, well, I increased it 50p, but there's no real action plan there for me to do it. Whereas if we work backwards from, you need to increase it £1,500, then we can say, well, how are we going to get there and what skills will be needed?
Yeah, and this is the conversation around developing top talent versus sort of emerging talent. The top talent, those stretch targets will be even higher. And you might diversify a little bit. So actually, I want you to do that, but also I expect a little bit of new business work or a bit of this or a bit of the other. So yeah, it's all about being individual. And you can have a goal of increased revenue or of conversions of leads, but depending on the sort of the level of the talent, if you like, you can tailor those to their skill sets.
Awesome, Phill. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Harry. Cheers.